In Lochdu, the annual Flower and Produce Show was never merely about flowers or produce. It was about whose jam had set properly, whose onions had character, whose dahlias had survived the weather, and whose private pride could bear public judging. This year, the stakes were higher. A visiting horticultural judge had come to inspect the village's heritage seed project, and her decision might bring Lochdu a small but precious garden grant. There were bigger scandals in the world, certainly, but in a Highland village hall full of damp coats, polished marrows, and old grudges wrapped in politeness, even a copper plant label could point toward trouble. Chapter 1. The Marrow on the Table. Rain tapped steadily against the windows of Lochdu Village Hall, as if asking to be entered in the show. Inside, the hall smelled of wet coats, furniture polish, strong tea, and competitive baking. Trestle tables filled the room in uneven rows. On one side stood jars of jam, chutney, marmalade, and something Mrs. Wellington insisted was spiced autumn relish, though Nessie Curry had already said twice that it looked like chutney with ambition. On the other side were the vegetables. Carrots lay straight as soldiers. Onions sat smugly in their brown skins. Cabbages looked like they had opinions. At the far end, beneath the notice board, stood the prize table, which no one was looking at directly, and everyone was watching. Morven Drummond, chairwoman of the Lochdu Garden Circle, moved among the tables with a clipboard and a smile that made people correct themselves before she spoke. "Dahlias beside dahlias, please," she said. "Sweet peas are not enhanced by being hidden behind beetroot." Mrs. McCrae moved her vase an inch and muttered, "Flowers should be judged by beauty, not geography." "They are being judged by both today," said Morven, without turning round. Hamish Macbeth arrived carrying a cardboard box of raffle tickets and a window box he had not planted. He was tall, red-haired, damp from the rain, and already regretting having answered his telephone that morning. Mrs. Patel came from the kitchen hatch with tea. "There you are, Hamish." "There I am," said Hamish. "And why is there a label on this thing saying police station window box?" "Because it is from the police station. It is from your shop. I saw you put pansies in it yesterday. You saw community improvement. I saw interference." Mrs. Patel smiled. "Same thing sometimes." The window box contained pansies, thyme, and one trailing plant making a bid for freedom. Hamish set it down as far from the judging table as possible. Lugs, his dog, took immediate interest in the floor beneath the baking table, where civic duty often dropped crumbs. The hall doors opened with a wet gust, and Archie Bell came in carrying something wrapped in a towel. Conversation thinned. Archie was a broad, red-faced man with a cap pulled low and the solemn air of a father bringing a child to christening. He laid the towel on the vegetable table and folded it back. The marrow was enormous. It was pale green, smooth, and absurdly calm, as if size alone had made it philosophical. Jessie Curry breathed. "Mercy," Nessie whispered. "That's not a marrow. That's a situation." Archie heard them and stood taller. "Naturally grown," Mrs. Wellington sniffed. "Naturally overfed. Jealousy is bad for the soil," said Archie. "So is boasting," she replied. Hamish stepped closer. "Let the poor thing rest, Archie. It's had a heavy morning carrying your reputation." A few people laughed. Archie did not, but he enjoyed being important too much to be properly offended. Near the stage, Morven had arranged the display that mattered most to her. A cream card read, "Lochdu Heritage Seed Project." Around it stood small pots of beans, peas, and young greens. Each had a narrow copper plant label pushed into the soil. The labels looked handsome, old-fashioned, and faintly green at the edges in the damp air. Hamish noticed Morven checking the display more often than she checked the flowers. That told him something, though he was not yet sure what. The grant attached to the Heritage Seed Project was not large enough to make anyone rich, but it was large enough to repair neglected garden plots, build a proper seed store, and give Lochdu the pleasure of being praised for preserving something rare. Villages could survive without praise. They did not always forgive being overlooked. The hall doors opened again. This time a woman stepped in, wiping her shoes carefully on the mat before looking round. She was in her early 60s, neat, composed, and unsmiling without seeming unfriendly. Her silver-brown hair was cut to her jaw, and she carried a leather satchel that looked as if it contained forms no one could charm. Morven hurried forward. "Dr. Blaine, welcome to Lochdew." "Thank you, Mrs. Drummond." "Morven, please." Dr. Verity Blaine gave a small nod, accepting the kindness without surrendering to it. The room subtly improved itself. A jar was turned label out. A vase was straightened. Archie wiped an invisible mark from his marrow. Verity began with the flowers. She praised good stems, noted bruising, and asked questions that made several gardeners wish weather could be blamed for handwriting. At the preserves table, she listened politely to Mrs. Wellington's explanation of the relish and wrote something down. When she reached Archie's marrow, he folded his arms. "A proper specimen," he said. "It is large," said Verity. Archie waited. She made a note. "That's all?" he said. For the moment. Hamish hid a smile in his tea. Morven guided Verity toward the heritage seed table with a brighter tone. "And here is the project I mentioned in my letter. Local lines, gathered and revived through the garden circle." Verity's attention sharpened. She lifted one of the printed cards. "Lochdew Blue Bean. What written record supports the name?" Morven's smile held. "Much Highland knowledge survives orally." "Quite," said Verity. "But grant committees enjoy paper." Archie, who had drifted closer, gave a small snort. "Paper's troublesome. It remembers who owned what." Morven turned to him. "Thank you, Archie. Your marrow is waiting for you. I'm only admiring village heritage. You rarely admire anything quietly." Verity reached toward one of the pots and touched the copper label. It was damp from the soil. When she lifted her hand, a faint green smear marked the side of her thumb. Hamish saw her notice it. He also saw Morven notice her, noticing it. Verity wiped her thumb with a handkerchief and looked again at the neat lettering on the label. "Who supplied this seed?" she asked. "The garden circle collected it," said Morven. "From whom?" There was a pause, small enough to be denied, and long enough to matter. "Several local sources," said Morven. Verity closed her notebook. "Then I shall need the list." "Of course," said Morven, but her hand had tightened on the clipboard. Outside, the rain kept tapping at the glass. Inside, the village hall was warm, busy, and bright with flowers, and Hamish, looking at the green smear fading on Dr. Blaine's thumb, had the uneasy feeling that something in Lochdew had already begun to rot beneath the polish. Chapter 2. The Judge Who Wouldn't Be Charmed. Dr. Verity Blaine did not judge like a woman enjoying a village show. She judged like a woman who believed village shows mattered. That, Hamish thought, was what unsettled everyone. Had she been grand or sharp, Lochdew could have disliked her comfortably. Had she laughed too much, they could have dismissed her as another outsider charmed by rain, hills, and scones heavy enough to anchor a boat. But Verity was neither cruel nor flattering. She gave each entry the dangerous courtesy of taking it seriously. At the flower table, Mrs. McCrae stood waiting while Verity examined her dahlias. "Strong colour," said Verity. "The stems are uneven." Mrs. McCrae blinked. "They grew that way." "Yes," said Verity. "Most things do." It took Mrs. McCrae several seconds to decide whether she had been insulted. By then, Verity had moved on. At the preserves table, Mrs. Wellington described her spiced autumn relish with the confidence of a woman prepared to defend it in court. Verity listened, tasted a small spoonful, and made a note. "Well?" said Mrs. Wellington. "Interesting." "Interesting good?" "Interesting." Nessie Curry, who had positioned herself close enough to hear without seeming to, whispered, "That means no." Jessie whispered back, "No, but educated." Morven Drummond hovered beside Verity with her clipboard pressed to her chest. She had stopped smiling so widely. It was still a smile, but now it had edges. "We are very proud of the local effort," she said. "It has brought people together." "Effort is admirable," said Verity. "Documentation is useful." Morven's smile tightened another degree. "Hamish, standing near the kitchen hatch with his tea, watched the exchange with interest. A village hall was never quiet, yet certain silences could be heard beneath the clatter of cups. This was one of them. Archie Bell had returned to his Marrow, but was watching the heritage seed table with open satisfaction. "You're enjoying yourself," Hamish said. "I enjoy accuracy. You usually enjoy being right." "That's because I often am, only in your own hearing." Archie gave him a wounded look. "There are folk in this village who have made a career of being respectable." "That sounds tiring." "It is for those of us forced to watch it." Before Hamish could ask what he meant, the telephone in his pocket rang. He stepped into the little anteroom off the hall, where spare chairs, lost umbrellas, and boxes of Christmas decorations went to lose hope. "Macbeth," he said. Blair's voice burst through the line. "Well, has your flower pot won first prize?" "It is not a flower pot." "What is it, then?" "A window box." Blair gave a laugh that seemed to enjoy itself more than Hamish did. "Aye, that'll look fine on your record. Constable Macbeth, decorated for services to pansies." "I've had worse postings." "I'm coming north later," said Blair. Hamish closed his eyes briefly. "There's no need." "There's every need." "A police station entered in a flower show? I wouldn't miss it. The village show is busy enough." "I'll bring a camera." "That would be evidence of cruelty." Blair snorted and rang off. When Hamish returned to the hall, Verity was back at the heritage display. Morven stood beside her. Archie stood too close, pretending not to. Mrs. Patel was wiping cups at the hatch in a way that allowed full attention to the room. Verity held one of the printed provenance cards. "You have written here that the Lochs blue bean has been maintained in local gardens for generations. Which gardens?" Morven gave a light laugh. "Dr. Blaine, you must understand. People here are not always formal record keepers." "No," said Verity. "But gardeners are often sentimental ones. They save envelopes, labels, notes in almanacs, letters," Archie said. "Some do." Morven turned. "Archie, unless your Marrow has developed speech, perhaps you could let Dr. Blaine do her work." "My Marrow would tell the truth if it could." "Then it would be unusual in your household." A few people looked down quickly. Verity did not smile. She set the card back in place. "I am not looking for perfection," she said. "Old seed lines rarely come with perfect histories. I am looking for honesty about uncertainty." That sentence landed more heavily than a rebuke. Morven lifted her chin. "The garden circle has worked very hard." "I do not doubt it. It has taken time, organization, and a good deal of unpaid labor." "I do not doubt that either." "Then I hope you will not allow missing scraps of paper to overshadow the spirit of the project." Verity looked at her for a moment. "Mrs. Drummond, in seed conservation, scraps of paper are often where the truth has been hiding." Hamish saw Archie's expression brighten. He also saw Morven notice. From the kitchen hatch, Mrs. Patel called, "More tea?" It was a generous interruption, and everyone accepted it as if tea had solved the question. It had not. It had merely given the question a saucer. Verity took her cup and asked, "Where does Mrs. Elspeth Kerr live?" The effect was slight but clear. Nessie Curry stopped whispering. Jessie stopped repeating. Morven's hand moved against her clipboard as if checking that it was still there. "Up above the loch," said Hamish. Morven turned to him quickly. "Elspeth is not always well." "I asked where she lived," said Verity. "Yes, of course. I only mean that she tires easily." "Does she?" "She has had trouble with her hip. That is unfortunate, and she becomes confused when pressed." The words were soft. They were also too ready. Hamish looked at Morven. Verity did too. "Has Mrs. Kerr been pressed recently?" Verity asked. Morven gave a small laugh. "No one is pressing anyone. We are trying to protect an elderly neighbour from fuss." "Protection can be kind," said Verity. "It can also be convenient." The hall seemed suddenly full of people pretending not to listen. Archie folded his arms. Elspeth knows more about beans than Morven ever learned from a committee. Morven's face flushed. That is enough. It was enough years ago, said Archie. Before folks started borrowing what they didn't grow. Hamish stepped in quietly. Archie. The warning was mild, but Archie heard it. He looked away, though not before Verity had marked the exchange. I would like to visit Mrs. Kerr this afternoon, Verity said. Morven's voice stayed pleasant. I am afraid that may not be suitable. For whom? For Elspeth. Then I shall ask her. There was no anger in Verity's tone. That made it harder to resist. Morven lowered her clipboard. You may find she does not remember things clearly. Memory is often untidy, said Verity. That does not make it useless. Hamish watched the two women stand facing one another among the polished labels, damp leaves and careful cards. The room still smelled of tea and flowers, but something sharper had entered it now. Not danger exactly. Exposure. Outside the rain softened, and through the window a strip of pale light appeared over the loch. Someone said the weather might clear after all. Someone else said it would not last. Hamish looked again at the heritage table. The copper labels shone warmly under the hall lights. Their lettering was neat, their rows orderly, their story ready for judging. But the more Verity Blaine asked about them, the less tidy they seemed. Chapter 3. The garden behind the net curtains. Elspeth Kerr lived above the village where the road narrowed, the wind sharpened, and the loch could be seen between two leaning rowans. Her cottage had once been whitewashed, though rain and years had softened it to the colour of old bone. Net curtains hung in the front windows, not quite straight. Behind the house, the garden dropped in uneven terraces toward a low stone wall, then rose again in a muddle of bean poles, herbs, seed trays, and a greenhouse that looked one good storm away from becoming a memory. Hamish arrived just after noon, before Dr. Verity Blaine could make her visit, and before Morven Drummond could smooth the way too thoroughly. P.C. Alan MacLeod came with him, mostly because Blair had sent him north with instructions to keep an eye on Macbeth, which Alan had interpreted as standing nearby and looking apologetic. She'll know like two policemen at her door, said Hamish. I could wait by the gate. You'll look like bad news trying to be polite. Alan considered this. I often do. Hamish knocked. There was a pause. Then a voice from inside called, If that is Morven, I'm dead. It's Hamish Macbeth. Another pause. That is less final. The door opened to reveal Elspeth Kerr, small, thin, and wrapped in a cardigan the colour of peat smoke. Her white hair was pinned loosely, and her eyes were bright, with the old Highland suspicion that hospitality should never be allowed to interfere with judgment. She looked at Hamish, then at Alan. You've brought reinforcements for my broad beans? Alan here is mostly decorative, said Hamish. Alan blushed. Good afternoon, Mrs. Kerr. Is it? I'll take your word for it. She let them in. The kitchen was warm, cluttered, and practical. Seed catalogues were stacked beside the toaster. A teapot sat under a knitted cosy shaped like a hen. On the windowsill, tomato seedlings leaned toward the weak light with more optimism than strength. Elspeth lowered herself into a chair with care but no complaint. You're here because of the show, she said. Ah, yeah. Morven sent you? No. That improves you. Hamish accepted tea because refusing would have offended her more than drinking it. Alan accepted tea because he did not know how not to. It was strong enough to make him sit straighter. Dr. Blaine may come to ask you about the old seed lines, Hamish said. Elspeth looked toward the window. She should, if she wants the truth. And does Morven not have it? Elspeth laughed once, dryly. Morven has many things. Committees, labels, a voice that makes weak women agree. Whether she has the truth depends on who wrote it down first. Hamish waited. That was another of his skills. He could make waiting seem like laziness, and people often filled it with what they had meant not to say. Elspeth tapped the table with one bent finger. My father kept beans, his mother kept peas. Not in a grand way, not for medals, because they grew here and because they fed people when shopseed failed. Kerr's early pea? Hamish asked. Her eyes sharpened. "You've seen that name?" "On a copper label at the hall." She sat, very still. "Have you now?" Alan, attempting helpful conversation, said, "Your cabbages look very sturdy outside." Elspeth turned to him. "Those are kale." Alan went red. "Fine kale. They are not fine either." Hamish saw the corner of her mouth move. She liked him better for being embarrassed. "Morven helps with the garden?" Hamish asked. "She began after my hip went bad. Brought young people from the garden circle, tidied paths, wrote labels, took cuttings. Very kind, everyone said. But," Elspeth looked at him, "there is kindness that gives you your garden back, and there is kindness that learns where you keep the key." The words settled into the kitchen. Outside, rain ticked on the greenhouse glass. Elspeth pushed herself up. "Come." She led them through a back porch crowded with boots, cracked pots, and bundles of canes tied with string. The garden beyond was wet and narrow, but alive. Mint pushed between stones. Beans climbed patched poles. Old roses clung to a wall as if by memory alone. The greenhouse door groaned when she opened it. Inside, the air smelled of damp earth, tomato leaves, and rusted metal. Elspeth reached beneath a bench and drew out a square biscuit tin, its lid decorated with faded Highland dancers. She carried it back to the potting table and opened it. Inside were envelopes. Some were brown with age, some white, some made from folded newspaper. Each bore handwriting, years, names, notes on frost, soil, failures, small triumphs. Hamish looked at them with more respect than he showed most official files. "This is the old record," said Elspeth. "Not pretty enough for Morven's display." He lifted one envelope carefully. "You kept all this?" "My mother kept it. I kept it after her. Plants don't remember themselves for your convenience." Alan leaned closer. "That's a lot of history." Elspeth gave him a look. "That is a sentence people use when they have not read any of it." He stepped back. Hamish noticed the gaps before she pointed them out. Places in the tin where envelopes had lain long enough to leave cleaner patches beneath. "What's missing?" he asked. Elspeth's face changed. "Lochdew blue bean," she said. "Kerr's early pea. A black kale my father called minister's gloom because it survived every sermon and every frost. Who took them?" "I allowed Morven to borrow them." "When?" "Last spring." "For copying," she said. "For proper records." She said old paper could be damaged. "And she didna return them?" "She returned talk." Hamish looked at the tin again. "She told me I had mislaid them," Elspeth said. "Then she told me not to worry. Then she stopped asking me what I thought should be planted." There was no bitterness in her voice. That made it worse. Bitterness would have been easier to face than tired dignity. Hamish gently closed the tin. "Dr. Blaine needs to see this." "Aye," said Elspeth. "That is why Morven will not want her to." Alan shifted awkwardly. "Should we take the tin somewhere safe?" Elspeth's eyes flashed. "It is safe. It is mine." Hamish said, "No one's taking it without your say." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. On the way back down the garden path, Hamish glanced toward the village hall roof below, just visible through the rain. Lochdew looked peaceful from up here, grey, wet, and tucked into itself. But peace, he knew, sometimes depended on who had been asked to keep quiet. Chapter 4. The Potting Shed Door. By morning, the rain had stopped pretending to be weather and had become a habit. It ran from cottage roofs, trembled on fence wires, and gathered in the hollows of the road above Lochdew. The village hall still wore a festive air from the day before, though the bunting had sagged overnight and one paper rosette had detached itself from the wall, as if ashamed of human competition. Hamish was making tea at the police station when Mrs. Patel telephoned. "Hamish," she said, and because she did not begin with a greeting, he set down the kettle. "What is it?" "Elspeth Kerr has sent a boy down. Her garden gate is open. She says she did not open it." "Wind?" "She says wind does not untie knots." That was Elspeth all over. Hamish looked toward the window. The loch lay dull and grey beneath the morning cloud. Luggs lifted his head from beside the stove, read Hamish's expression, and decided this was not the sort of outing that improved breakfast. "I'll go up," said Hamish. He was halfway to Elspeth's cottage when he met P.C. Alan MacLeod coming down the lane, raincoat flapping and face pale. "I was sent to check the hall lock," Alan said. "Then I heard shouting from above. Mrs. Kerr. Is she hurt?" "No. But there's someone in the potting shed." Hamish did not ask the next question. Alan's face had already answered it. Elspeth Kerr stood by the back door of her cottage, one hand gripping the frame so tightly her knuckles were white. She had put on boots over her stockings and a cardigan over her nightdress, and the indignity of being seen so would have enraged her on any other morning. Not this one. "I told her to come after breakfast," Elspeth said. "Dr. Blaine?" Elspeth nodded once. "I saw the gate from the kitchen. It was open. I thought it was a fox, though foxes have better manners than some folk. Then I saw the shed door." Hamish touched her arm gently. "Stay here. I am not a child." "No," he said. "That's why I'm asking, not ordering." She looked at him, then gave a sharp, reluctant nod. The garden was wet and shining. Rainwater dripped from bean poles. Mint had been crushed near the path, releasing its clean smell into the damp air. The gate at the side wall hung open, its latch moving slightly in the wind. The potting shed stood beyond the leaning greenhouse. It was a narrow wooden building with a patched felt roof and one small window clouded by years of dust. The door was open now, but not properly. It hung half inward, as if someone had first held it closed and then changed their mind. Hamish paused outside. A loop of garden twine dangled from the outer latch. It had been cut cleanly at one end. He looked at Alan. "Did you touch it?" "No." "Good lad." Inside, the shed smelled of earth, old wood, and damp paper. Seed trays lined one wall. Tools hung in strict order above the bench. A cracked enamel mug held plant labels. On the floor, several seed envelopes lay scattered, their corners darkened by wet footprints. Dr. Verity Blaine was there. There was no drama in it, which made it worse. She sat slumped beside the potting bench, one hand near her leather satchel, her notebook fallen open on the boards. The woman who had made Lochs straighten its labels now lay still among old labels that had outlived her. Alan turned away. Hamish stood quietly for a moment. He had seen death before, in places rougher than Elspeth's potting shed, but there was something particularly wrong about it here, among seed trays and string, in a place built for keeping small living things alive. He crouched, careful not to disturb the floor. Verity's satchel was open. Her notebook showed several lines in her neat hand. The last full entry read, "Care garden source." The line beneath had been torn away. Hamish did not touch the page. Behind the leg of the bench, half hidden in wet dust, lay a copper plant label. It was bent at one corner. The lettering was difficult to read in the dim shed, but when Hamish lifted it with the edge of a pencil, the damp metal left a faint green mark on his glove. He remembered Verity's thumb in the hall. Outside, a car door slammed. "Macbeth?" Blair's voice came through the garden like a thrown bucket. "Where the devil are you?" Hamish closed his eyes briefly. Blair arrived at the shed door red-faced and breathing hard, with Detective Jimmy Anderson behind him, less noisy and more observant. Blair took one look inside and drew himself up, as if the shed had been placed there to inconvenience him personally. "Dead, is she?" "Aye," said Hamish. "Doctor called?" "On the way." "Then nobody touches anything. And get that old woman out of here before she starts inventing tales." Hamish turned very slowly. Elspeth stood by the back porch, hearing enough. Her face had become smaller, but her eyes had not. "She is not inventing anything," said Hamish. Blair waved a hand. "Old folk get confused. Sheds, strings, keys. Half the time they forget what they had for breakfast." Hamish's voice softened. That was when Alan, who had only known him a little while, looked up sharply. "You'll no speak over Mrs. Kerr in her own garden," Hamish said. Blair stared at him. What did you say? I said you'll no speak over her. The words were quiet, but they had a thin, cutting edge. Even the rain seemed to make less noise for a moment. Anderson coughed. Sir, we should secure the path. Blair glared, then jerked his head. Do it! Hamish stepped back from the shed and looked again at the door. The loop of twine outside. The clean cut. The way the latch could be held from beyond the door if someone wanted a person inside to remain inside, at least long enough. Elspeth had come closer now, wrapped in dignity as much as wool. She came for the tin, Elspeth said. Hamish turned. Did she see it? No. I told her I would bring it out after tea. She said she had already seen enough to know questions needed answering. Elspeth's mouth trembled, but only once. She was not an easy woman. No, said Hamish, but she seems to have been a useful one. Elspeth looked toward the shed. That is often more dangerous. Down in the village, the hall bell began to ring for the opening of the second day of the flower and produce show. It sounded thin in the wet morning air. People would be arriving with cakes, flowers, jars, hopes, and the small cruelties of judging. And above them all, in an old garden where names had been kept on paper and copper, something tidy had been made wrong. Chapter 5. Bad sandwiches. Good broth. Blair liked theories that arrived quickly, wore heavy boots, and required very little bending. By noon, he had one. Archie Bell, he said, slapping a hand on the canteen table at Strathbane police station. There's your man. Hamish looked at the sandwich in front of him and wondered whether it had been assembled or excavated. The bread was dry at the edges. The cheese had the shine of plastic, and the pickle smelled as if it had given up on joy. Across from him, Blair ate with the grim confidence of a man determined not to let taste interfere with authority. Archie threatened her. Blair went on. Half the hall heard it. He argued about seeds. He argued loudly. Same thing. In court if you say it properly. Detective Jimmy Anderson, seated beside them, stirred his tea and said nothing. That was one of his more intelligent habits. Hamish pushed the sandwich away. Archie likes noise. Murder requires a wee bit more commitment. It requires temper, said Blair. He has plenty. And opportunity? He lives in the village. So does everyone else. Blair leaned back. You always do this, Macbeth. You take a simple case and go wandering through emotional shrubbery. It was a potting shed. Don't get clever. Hamish took out his notebook. Verity Blaine's last note said, Cur garden sauce? The line after it was torn away. So Archie tore it. Why would Archie care about missing seed records? Because he hated Morven. Wanted to embarrass her. That would make him more likely to help Verity than kill her. Blair scowled. You've an answer for everything. No. That's why I'm asking questions. Blair's face reddened in stages. You listen to me. We bring Bell in, we lean on him, and this village nonsense stops before the papers start making jokes about murderous Marrows. Hamish looked at Anderson. Anderson looked at his tea. It had clearly chosen neutrality. By the time Hamish returned to Lochdew, the rain had thinned to a mist. The village hall was still open, though the show had changed. People moved more softly now. A death above the village had not cancelled the prize schedule, but it had taken some of the shine from the onions. Morven Drummond stood near the heritage seed table, speaking quietly to two garden circle women. She wore the same green waistcoat as the day before, but there was soil on one cuff and strain at the corners of her mouth. Archie Bell was at the vegetable table, arms folded, his huge Marrow beside him like a silent character witness. You've been to Strathbane, he said as Hamish approached. Ah, yeah. They blaming me yet? They've noticed your charm. Archie snorted. I told the truth. That's all. You told something. It may have been truth wearing its muddy boots. Archie looked away. Verity Blaine knew there was something wrong with that heritage display. What did she say to you? Asked about Elspeth. Asked if Morven had been helping her long. I said, helping is a fine word when it's not carrying things away. Hamish watched him. Did you go to Elspeth's garden last night? No. This morning? No. Anyone see you? My hens. They're poor witnesses, but honest. Hamish almost smiled. Archie was vain, jealous, and incapable of leaving a bruise alone. But there was an openness to his irritation that did not fit secrecy well. Inside the small committee room, Mrs. Patel had laid out the show records because Morven, after some persuasion, had admitted she was too shaken to sort them herself. There were entry cards, judging sheets, a key log for the locked display cupboard, and a folder marked Heritage Seed Provenance in Morven's fine hand. Hamish sat down. Mrs. Patel placed a bowl of broth beside him. I did not ask for that. No, she said. That is why I brought it. The broth smelled of leeks, barley, and a kindness that had not been discussed. Hamish took a spoonful and felt his opinion of humanity recover slightly. Mrs. Patel remained by the door. You're very quiet, he said. I am often quiet. Not like this. She folded a tea towel. Quiet is safer before a village decides what it knows. Hamish looked up. She did not meet his eye. He began with the entry cards. Archie's handwriting was large, impatient, and slanted, as if even the letters were arguing. Mrs. Wellington's was firm and rounded. Morven's was elegant, with tall loops and careful spacing. Then he opened the provenance folder. The cards were impressive at first glance. Each seed line had a description, a supposed local history, and a note on revival. But the older the claimed history, the newer the paper looked. Hamish took from his pocket the notes he had copied from Elspeth's biscuit tin. Her handwriting was shakier, smaller, and older-fashioned, with a habit of curling the final letters inward. He compared it with Morven's forms. At first there was nothing. Then he saw it in the name Kerr's Early P. On Morven's card, the words were written neatly, too neatly. But under the dark ink, where the pen had pressed hard and the paper had been handled damp, there seemed to be a faint earlier indentation. Not ink. Pressure, as if someone had copied over a name already written by another hand. He held the page toward the light. Mrs. Patel watched him, watching it. Do you have something to say? He asked. No. You usually have something not to say. She looked toward the hall, where voices murmured around the prize tables. Dr. Blaine asked me yesterday whether Elspeth still labelled in copper. When? After tea. Before she left the hall. And what did you tell her? That Elspeth labelled everything, even dead plants sometimes, so they would know why they had failed. Hamish sat back. Did Morven hear? Mrs. Patel hesitated. She was close enough to hear if she wished to. That was not proof. But it was shape. He turned to the key log. The display cupboard at the hall had been locked overnight. 3 people had signed for the key the day before. Morven, Mrs. Patel, and a garden circle volunteer named Catriona Sutherland. Morven had signed out the key again at 7:10 that morning. After Verity Blaine was already dead, if Elspeth's memory of the visit time was right, why sign out a key to a display cupboard before the show reopened? Hamish made a note. From the hall came Blair's voice, loud and satisfied. Where's Belle? Mrs. Patel closed her eyes briefly. Hamish rose. In the main hall, Blair was bearing down on Archie with the air of a man approaching low-hanging fruit. Archibald Bell, Blair began. Archie straightened. If you're here to admire the Marrow, form a queue. Blair grabbed his arm. Hamish's voice cut across the hall, mild but clear. I wouldna do that yet. Blair turned. And why not? Hamish looked at Archie, then at Morven, then at the polished copper labels shining under the hall lights. Because the obvious weed is not always the root. Chapter 6. The Easy Gardener. Archie Bell's cottage stood at the lower edge of the village, where the road dipped toward the pier and the wind had room to arrive with opinions. Behind it lay his allotment strip. 2 narrow beds, a lean-to made of old doors, bean poles tied with orange string, and a scarecrow wearing a battered police cap. The cap had appeared there 3 summers before, and everyone knew Archie had placed it there to annoy Hamish. Everyone also knew Hamish had never asked for it back, which had annoyed Archie more. Blair strode down the path first, boots sinking into the pale, sandy soil. "This is where genius grows vegetables, is it?" he said. Archie folded his arms. "Better than where you grow manners." "Careful." "I am careful. That's why my Marrow has shoulders." Hamish came behind them, moving more slowly. Lugs had followed as far as the gate, sniffed the air, and decided Archie's garden offered less promise than Mrs. Patel's shop. He sat down in the lane, loyal at a distance. Archie saw Blair looking at the beanpoles. "Touch nothing," he said. "You'll set them back. I'm investigating murder. And I'm preserving runner beans. We all have work." Blair turned on him. "You had a public row with Dr. Blaine?" "I had a public row with Morven. There's a difference. You threatened to ruin the show. I threatened to tell the truth. Convenient." Archie's face darkened. "I didna kill that woman." "You expect us to take your word?" "I expect you to find sense with both hands and a lantern. But I've learned not to hope too much." Blair stepped closer. Hamish said, "Archie, only one word." It was enough. Archie's jaw worked, but he looked away. Hamish crouched by the nearest bed and rubbed a little soil between his fingers. Light, gritty, sandy, good drainage, poor for secrets. The soil in Elspeth Kerr's garden had been dark, heavy loam that clung to boots and held water like memory. "What did you do yesterday evening?" Hamish asked. "Fed the hens. Covered the Marrow. Had my tea. Anyone see you?" "My neighbour saw smoke from my chimney." "That proves a chimney, not you." Archie looked offended. "My chimney would not lie for me." Blair gave a harsh laugh. "You hear that, Macbeth? He's got an alibi made of smoke." Hamish stood. "Did Verity Blaine come here?" "No." "Did she ask about your garden?" "She asked about Morven." "And Elspeth? And the seeds?" "What did you tell her?" Archie looked toward the lean-to. Rain tapped on its tin roof. "I told her Elspeth kept the old lines. Always had. Folk used to go to her for seed when shop packets failed. Morven came late to it." "Late?" "After there was a grant in the air." Blair snapped. "You keep saying that as if it proves anything." "It proves she likes applause better than mud." Hamish glanced at the plant markers in Archie's beds. They were white plastic stakes, each written in thick black marker. Some had been reused so often that old words ghosted through the new ones. "No copper labels?" Hamish asked. Archie snorted. "Copper labels are for people who want their onions to feel important. Plastic does the job. Ever use twine loops on your shed doors?" "I use bolts. Twine is for tying plants and weak excuses." Blair walked to the lean-to and pulled open the door. "Hey!" Archie shouted. Inside were sacks of compost, cracked pots, old newspapers, and a row of glass jars full of saved seed. Blair poked at them with a pencil, more theatrical than careful. "Where were these from?" "My plants." "All of them?" Archie's eyes narrowed. "You think I stole beans now?" "I think loud men often hide loud sins. And I think fat men often confuse bullying with work." The garden went still. Hamish stepped between them before Blair's temper became evidence of its own. "Enough." Blair jabbed a finger toward Archie. "I'll have him in Strathbane before supper." "For what?" asked Hamish. "Insulting police? You'd have to arrest half the Highlands." "He had motive." "Aye. A noisy one. He had temper. Plenty. And no proper alibi." "That too?" Blair glared. "Then what are you waiting for?" Hamish pointed to Archie's boots by the back step. "Those." The boots were caked with pale grit, not dark loam. The soles were dry under the fresh surface damp, as if they had not recently crossed Elspeth's garden. Hamish had already seen the prints near the potting shed. Heavier soil, darker, sticky enough to pull at the tread. Blair looked unimpressed. "Boots can be cleaned." "They can. But Archie's no a man who cleans quietly." Archie looked torn between gratitude and insult. Hamish walked to the far edge of the plot where several seed trays sat under a pane of glass. Each tray bore Archie's broad, impatient handwriting. There was no attempt at elegance, no overwriting, no careful transformation of one hand into another. A vain man, perhaps. A jealous man, certainly. But vanity and jealousy were common village weeds. Murder required a deeper root. Archie lowered his voice. "She was going to ask Elspeth the right questions, wasn't she?" "Aye," said Hamish. "I think so." "Then ask why folk were afraid of the answers." Blair muttered something under his breath and stamped toward the gate. As he passed the scarecrow, the old police cap slipped sideways in the wind and landed in the mud. Lugs, from the lane, rose long enough to sniff it, then sat again with the air of a dog refusing involvement in official embarrassment. Archie picked up the cap, wiped it badly on his sleeve, and handed it to Hamish. "Yours, I believe." "It has been yours for 3 years. I was keeping it for evidence." "Of what?" Archie's mouth twitched. Poor judgment. For the first time that morning, Hamish smiled. Then he looked back toward the village hall, where Morven's copper labels sat polished under the lights, and Elspeth's missing seed envelopes had names that someone else had begun to claim. Archie Bell might have been the gardener everyone wanted to blame, but the soil on him was wrong. And, in Hamish's experience, soil was less eager than people to tell a useful lie. Chapter 7. Hamish's kindness goes wrong. By late afternoon, Lochs had reached the stage of investigation where nobody knew anything, but everyone knew it first. The village shop was full. Rain streaked the window. The bell above the door kept jangling, and customers studied tins of peas with the concentration of scholars while listening to every word spoken near the counter. Mrs. Patel stood behind it, weighing sugar for Mrs. Wellington. Hamish came in quietly, which was pointless in a village shop. Silence drew more attention than noise. Nessie Curry turned from a shelf of biscuits. Jessie, beside her, turned half a second later. "Hamish," said Nessie. "Constable," said Jessie, as if improving the formality might improve the news. "There's no news," said Hamish. "We did not ask," said Nessie. "No," said Jessie. "Not yet." Mrs. Patel gave Hamish a look that said he had walked into a trap and should not blame the furniture. He waited until Mrs. Wellington had taken her sugar, judged the cue, and decided not to leave. Then he leaned closer to Mrs. Patel. "Ah, Vort." She followed him to the corner by the postcards and fishing permits. "I need you not to repeat something," he said. "That is an unfortunate beginning. Elspeth's old seed envelopes are missing. Some of them. Lochs blue bean, Kerr's early pea, maybe others." Mrs. Patel's face changed only slightly. "To whom must I not repeat it?" "To anyone." "That is a very wide circle." "I mean it. If folk hear, they'll say Elspeth is confused, or careless, or imagining theft because she's old. She's had enough taken from her." Mrs. Patel looked toward the counter, where the Curry sisters were pretending to compare oatcakes. "You think silence protects her. I think noise will hurt her. Sometimes silence helps the person who took the thing." Hamish knew that. It was the trouble with kindness. It often arrived wearing the same coat as fear. "I need time," he said. Mrs. Patel nodded. "Then I shall say nothing." He believed her. That was his mistake. She did say nothing, in the strict sense. She told Nessie Curry only that Elspeth Kerr was not to be troubled with questions about old envelopes, which, to Mrs. Patel's mind, was not repeating anything at all. Nessie told Jessie that nobody was to ask Elspeth about missing envelopes. Jessie told Mrs. McCrae that there were envelopes, though she could not say whether they were missing or not, because she had been told not to. By 5:30, the village had achieved a useful compromise between secrecy and invention. Elspeth Kerr, it was said, had lost important papers, misremembered who had borrowed them, hidden things from herself, or possibly accused the garden circle in a fit of distress. No one said this cruelly. That was what made it cruel. At the hall, the flower and produce show continued under a changed light. The prize cards had been laid out, though the ceremony was postponed until the police gave permission. People moved between tables, with lowered voices and bright, guilty eyes. Morven Drummond stood beside the heritage display, speaking to 2 visitors from the District Gardening Association. Her voice was gentle enough to make sympathy seem like proof. "Poor Elspeth," she was saying. "She has been a remarkable gardener, but age is not kind. She has become anxious about things being moved." Hamish stopped behind a row of onions. One of the visitors said, "How sad." "Very," said Morven. "We have tried to involve her as much as she can bear. But one must be careful not to distress elderly people by making them responsible for records they no longer understand." The sentence was perfect. Too perfect. It sounded kind, reasonable, and impossible to challenge without seeming unkind oneself. Hamish walked over. "Afternoon, Morven." She turned. "Hamish, any progress?" "A little. I do hope you are not upsetting Elspeth with all these questions. She seems more upset by other folk answering for her." The 2 visitors looked at the seed pots. Morven's smile remained in place. "I only meant that she is frail." "She is frail in the hip, not in the mind. Those things can be connected." "Aye," said Hamish. "Mostly by people who find it convenient." For a moment, the polite air around Morven thinned. Then she looked past him and waved to someone near the kitchen. "Catriona, dear, could you check the raffle books?" A young woman in a flour-dusted apron hurried away, grateful to be given a task. Hamish watched her go. "Catriona Sutherland signed the key log yesterday." "Yes," said Morven. "She helps with the stall. Did she unlock the display cupboard?" "I cannot remember every key movement in the middle of a show, but you can remember Elspeth being confused." Morven's eyes cooled. "That is unfair." "Maybe. It is easy for you to stand outside the work and judge it. That's what Dr. Blaine was doing too." The words landed. Morven did not answer. Hamish left her by the copper labels and went round the side of the hall where crates, spare bunting, and empty jam boxes had been stacked under an awning. A boy was there, pretending to tie his shoelace. Hamish had seen him earlier delivering milk to the shop. Robbie Sutherland, 12 years old, narrow-shouldered, quick-eyed, and carrying the burden of having heard something adults had not meant him to hear. "Robbie," said Hamish. The boy sprang upright. "I never touched anything." "That's a busy denial. I didna touch police things." "I haven't accused you." Robbie stared at the ground. Hamish leaned against the wall beside him, leaving space. "You were up near Elspeth's lane this morning?" "No." "Robbie." The boy swallowed. "I had deliveries." "Did you see someone leaving her garden?" Robbie's face went pale in the damp light. "No. It was too quick." Hamish waited. Robbie twisted the lace of his shoe until it nearly snapped. "My mum works the garden circle stall. Morven gives her hours when there's events. If folk think I'm making trouble, truth is not trouble." Robbie looked at him with the bleak wisdom of a child who had already learned that adults often punished the difference. "It is when you're poor," he said. Hamish had no ready answer for that. From inside the hall came a burst of laughter, too loud and too short. "Someone was trying to make the show normal again. Did you see Morven?" Hamish asked softly. Robbie's mouth tightened. He shook his head, but his eyes had already betrayed the question. Hamish did not press harder. "Not yet. Go on," he said. "And say nothing to anyone." Robbie gave him a look. Hamish sighed. "I know." As the boy slipped away, Hamish stood beneath the awning and watched rain drip from its edge into a row of empty flower buckets. He had tried to protect Elspeth with quiet. Morven had used quiet better, and somewhere between kindness and gossip, the truth had begun to lose its name. Chapter 8. The Green Smear. By dusk, Loch Dhu had become quiet in the particular way a village becomes quiet when everyone has spoken too much. The rain had stopped, but damp still clung to the walls of the police station. Hamish sat at his kitchen table with Elspeth Kerr's copied notes, Morven Drummond's provenance cards, and 3 cups of tea gone cold at different stages of neglect. Lugs lay under the table, nose tucked against one paw, deeply committed to not assisting. Hamish compared the names again. Lochdew Blue Bean. Kerr's Early Pea. Minister's Gloom Kale. On Elspeth's old envelopes, the letters were small and curling, written by a hand that had recorded weather, failures, and family habits over years. On Morven's cards, the same names stood neat and public, as if born already suitable for display. That was what troubled him. Not that Morven had copied them. Copying could be honest. It was the way the older hand seemed to have vanished beneath the newer one. A faint scratch sounded at the window. Hamish looked up. Sunsy stood on the sill outside, dark against the last grey of the evening. Her tail moved once, impatiently. Something small hung from her mouth. "Oh, no," said Hamish. He opened the window. Sunsy stepped in with the air of a creature entering property that already belonged to her. She crossed the table without apology, avoided the cold tea, and dropped the object on top of Morven's provenance folder. It was a copper plant label. Bent. Dirty. Green at the edges. Lugs opened one eye, decided the offering had no edible value, and closed it again. Hamish picked up the label carefully with a handkerchief. The scratched words were faint under a newer layer of marking, but readable when tilted toward the lamp. Kerr's Early Pea. His breath slowed. "Where did you get this, then?" Sunsy sat and washed one paw, declining to join the official record. The label had been overwritten, not merely relabeled. The older letters lay beneath the newer ones, uncertain but still present, like a voice speaking under another voice. Hamish set it beside the copper label found beneath the potting shed bench. Both had the same greenish damp stain along one edge. Both had been handled recently. Both bore marks where writing had been altered. He took off the glove he had worn at Elspeth's shed and laid it on the table. The faint verdigris smear still marked the leather. Then he remembered Verity Blaine, wiping her thumb in the hall. She had seen it too. Not just damp copper, a label that had been changed. The telephone rang. Hamish let it ring twice before answering. Macbeth. "It's Robbie." The boy's voice was low and breathless. "Where are you?" "By the pier." "I'm not supposed to be phoning." "Then you'd better make it worth the trouble." A silence. Then Robbie said, "I saw someone leaving Mrs. Kerr's lane yesterday. Early. Before folk were properly about." "Who?" "I didna see the face." Hamish said nothing. Robbie rushed on. "But I saw the green waistcoat, the one Mrs. Drummond wears. And she had something under her coat. I thought it was papers. Or a book." "What time?" "Before 7:30. I was taking milk up to McLean's. My mum says I mustn't get mixed in. Your mum is right to worry." "Then why do I feel bad?" "Because seeing something and burying it are different burdens." Another silence. "She helps my mum," Robbie said. "Morven does. Stall work. Cleaning after events. Little bits. I know. If I say, folk will know." "Not yet," said Hamish. "You've done enough for tonight." He put down the receiver and sat still. The case had shape now, though not enough weight for Blair. Blair liked evidence that shouted. This whispered in copper, soil, handwriting, and fear. Hamish placed the newly found label beside Elspeth's copied envelope notes. The name matched. The older hand matched. The overwritten strokes matched Morven's public script. But how had Sunsy found the label? He rose, took his coat, and went out. The air smelled washed and cold. A strip of pale light lay behind the western hills, and the village hall glowed below, warm and busy despite everything. Through the windows Hamish could see movement. Women clearing cups, men shifting tables. Morven standing near the heritage display with her clipboard held close. He walked past the hall, and round to the side where crates had been stacked under the awning. Behind them, in the damp earth near the bins, were small scratch marks, as if an animal had worried something loose from under the boards. There, half hidden beneath a broken seed tray, he found a scrap of torn notebook paper. Not enough to read a full sentence. Only 3 words in Verity Blaine's precise hand. Not garden circle. Hamish folded it into his notebook. A door opened behind him. Morven Drummond stepped out, carrying a bundle of cloth napkins. She stopped when she saw him. "Hamish." "I didn't hear you." "No," he said. "I was being quiet." "Bah." Her eyes went to the bins, the crates, then back to his face. "Have you found something?" "Aye, yeah." "What?" He looked at her for a moment. The hall light behind her made her look almost kindly again. Tired, capable, respectable. "Something small," he said. She gave a thin smile. "Small things do seem to have become very important." "They often were," said Hamish. "We just didn't always credit them." Morven's smile faded. From inside the hall came a call for her name. She turned quickly and went back in. Hamish remained by the bins, listening to the door close. Then he looked down at his handkerchief, where the green smear from the copper label had marked the white cotton. It was not much, only a stain, but it was the sort of stain that came from touching what someone else had tried to polish clean. Chapter 9. The prize table. The prize ceremony should have been postponed. Everyone agreed on that in principle. In practice, the hall was full by 3 o'clock. Lochs had endured death, suspicion, police boots in gardens, and the humiliation of being discussed by people from Strathbane. But the raspberry jam still needed a card. Archie Bell still wished to see his Marrow honoured, and Mrs. McCrae had not spent a wet season coaxing dahlias through wind merely to have grief cancel first prize. So the villagers came. They came quietly, but they came. The hall looked almost cheerful. The bunting had been rehung. The flower table glowed with colour under the lamps. The vegetables sat in polished rows. Morven Drummond had arranged the heritage seed display at the front beside the prize table, where no one could miss it. She wore her green waistcoat again. Hamish noticed that. Blair arrived late, which was his preferred way of entering any room that might otherwise manage without him. "Right," he said loudly. "Let's get this over with." Mrs. Patel, pouring tea near the kitchen hatch, looked at him. "That is also what people say before eating badly cooked cabbage." Blair ignored her, because he had no answer that would improve him. Morven stepped to the front with her clipboard. "Thank you all for coming," she said. Her voice was steady, gentle, and just touched with sorrow. "Dr. Blaine's death has shocked us all. She came here to help Lochs, and we shall remember her professionalism and her dedication." A murmur moved through the room. Hamish stood near the side wall, watching faces rather than listening to the words. Archie looked grim and restless. Elspeth Kerr sat in a chair Mrs. Patel had placed for her near the front, small and upright, her hands folded over the handle of her stick. Robbie Sutherland stood at the back beside his mother, not looking at Morven. Morven continued. "It has been suggested that our heritage seed project may be delayed. I hope that will not be so. This work belongs to the village, and I believe Dr. Blaine would not have wanted—" "No," said Hamish. It was not loud, but it stopped her. Morven looked at him. "I beg your pardon?" "I dinna think you should speak for Dr. Blaine." Blair turned. "Macbeth, what are you doing?" "My job, for once." That earned one small laugh from Archie, before he remembered the seriousness of the occasion and looked down at his boots. Blair strode forward. "If this is about Bell, I'll handle it. It is not about Archie Bell." Archie looked relieved, then disappointed at losing central importance. Hamish walked to the prize table and placed 3 things on it. A copper plant label wrapped in a handkerchief. A second copper label in an evidence bag. A handful of copied seed notes from Elspeth Kerr's old tin. The hall became very quiet. Morven stared at the table. "What is this?" "Names," said Hamish. "That is all. Small things, until someone tries to take them." Blair's face darkened. "Macbeth," Hamish looked at him. "You wanted a public arrest. I'm giving you the reason not to arrest the wrong man." Blair's mouth shut, though not graciously. Hamish lifted the first label with the handkerchief. "This was found at my cottage last night. Sunsey brought it in." "Sunsey?" Blair burst out. "Aye. She has a better nose for hidden things than some officers have for obvious ones." A few eyes moved toward Blair. He ignored them with effort. This label reads Kerr's Early P, said Hamish, but it has been overwritten. Beneath the neat script, there is an older hand, Elspeth's hand. Elspeth's fingers tightened on her stick. Hamish placed the label down gently. The second label was found under the bench in Elspeth's potting shed, where Dr. Blaine died. It is bent at the corner and damp. When touched, both labels leave the same green smear. Verdigris from old copper, Mrs. McCrae whispered. Like on Dr. Blaine's thumb, Hamish nodded. Aye. She touched a label in this hall and saw something wrong with it. Not just dirt, not just age. Overwriting, Morven said. Old labels are often reused. They are, said Hamish. If one says so. Her face changed slightly. Hamish continued. Dr. Blaine asked who supplied the seed. She asked to visit Elspeth. She asked about records. After that, a page was torn from her notebook. I found part of it by the bins last night. He took out the scrap and laid it beside the labels. 3 words survived. Not garden circle. A movement went through the hall, soft as wind through dry paper. Morven's voice was controlled. That proves nothing except that Dr. Blaine was considering several possibilities. It proves where her questions were going. It does not prove who killed her. No, said Hamish. So let us add the rest. He turned slightly so the room, not only Morven, could hear. The potting shed door had been latched from outside with a loop of garden twine. The twine was then cut. That was meant to make it look as if confusion, age, a bad latch, or an accident had done the work. Blair muttered. Could still have been Bell. No, said Hamish. Archie uses bolts on his shed, plastic stakes in his beds, and his soil is pale and sandy. The prints at Elspeth's shed carried dark loam. He is loud enough to be tempting, but he is the wrong sort of liar. Archie blinked. Thank you, I think. The person who mattered here was not Archie. It was Elspeth. All eyes moved to the old woman. Elspeth lifted her chin. Hamish's voice softened. For years, she and her family kept these seed lines alive. Not for grants, not for applause, because they grew here, and because someone had to remember them. Mrs. Patel lowered her eyes. Morven helped in Elspeth's garden after Elspeth's hip grew bad, Hamish went on. She wrote labels, took cuttings, borrowed old envelopes. Then the garden circle began presenting the seeds as village heritage under its own name. Morven's mouth tightened. It was village heritage. Aye, but heritage does not mean nameless. The words stayed in the air. Hamish turned toward Robbie Sutherland at the back. The boy went pale. You needna speak if you canna, Hamish said. But you told me you saw someone leaving Elspeth's Lane before 7:30 yesterday morning. Green waistcoat. Something hidden under a coat. Robbie's mother put a hand to her mouth. Morven said sharply, A child frightened by gossip is not evidence. No. But your key log is interesting too. Her eyes flicked to the clipboard. You signed out the hall display key at 7:10, Hamish said, before the show reopened. You said you were checking the display. But Dr. Blaine was already at Elspeth's garden by then, or close to it. You had gone there first. Morven said nothing. You knew Verity had found the trail. She had seen the labels, asked about Elspeth, and meant to compare the old envelopes. You went to Elspeth's garden to get what you could before Verity saw it, but Verity arrived. Elspeth closed her eyes. Hamish did not hurry. In the shed, Verity found enough. Maybe the old labels, maybe the missing envelopes, maybe only the truth of the handwriting. She would not leave it until after the grant decision, because that was exactly when the truth mattered. Morven's face had gone grey. Blair, sensing the moment, stepped forward. So you admit? I admit nothing, said Morven. But her voice had lost its surface. Hamish looked at her with something almost like pity. You did not plan a grand murder, he said. That is why it was messy. A loop of twine, a torn page, scattered labels, a copper label kicked under a bench, then a story about Elspeth being confused. Because if the village believed that, No one would trust the old records. Morven's eyes filled, though no tears fell. You have no idea, she said. No idea how much work I did. I was the one who organized it. I wrote the forms. I found volunteers. I kept that garden from collapsing when everyone else was content to call Elspeth a character and leave her to the weeds. Elspeth opened her eyes. No one spoke. Morven's voice rose, not into a scream, but into something more tired. I kept it alive, Hamish answered gently. Keeping a thing alive is not the same as claiming it as your own. That broke her. Not dramatically. She simply put one hand on the prize table, as if the polished wood had become the only steady thing in the room. She would have ruined everything, Morven said. For a name on a label. For a person, said Hamish. Morven looked at Elspeth then, truly looked at her, and the hall seemed smaller for it. Blair moved at last, eager to recover command. Morven Drummond, I am arresting you! Anderson, who had appeared quietly near the door, stepped in before Blair could make the words into a performance. This time, Morven did not resist. As she was led out, no one whispered. That was rare for Lochs, and therefore almost respectful. Archie Bell looked down at his Marrow. It's still a fine specimen, he said weakly. Mrs. Wellington sighed. Archie, sometimes a vegetable is not the point. He considered this. Then, because he was Archie, he said, It might still be second point. No one laughed loudly, but a few people smiled, and that was how the room began breathing again. Chapter 10. Seeds returned. The next morning, the rain finally stopped. Lochs did not become bright all at once. It was not that sort of place, but the clouds lifted enough to show the hills, and sunlight touched the wet leaves in Elspeth Kerr's garden until even the cracked greenhouse looked briefly hopeful. Hamish found Elspeth outside, wrapped in a shawl, sitting on a wooden chair near the bean-poles. A small table had been placed beside her. On it stood the old biscuit tin, 3 copper labels, 2 seed packets, and a jar of raspberry jam without a note. Elspeth, he said, do not look at me as if I am a widow at my own funeral. I was going to say good morning. Then say it quicker. Good morning? That will do. He smiled and leaned on the garden wall. Below, the village was moving carefully back into itself. Smoke rose from chimneys. A delivery van rattled past Patel's shop. Somewhere near the pier, Archie Bell's voice carried on the air, complaining about judging standards to anyone trapped within range. Your garden's busy, Hamish said. Elspeth looked toward the path. The first to arrive had been Mrs. Patel, with tea in a flask and a bag of scones that she described as edible but not ambitious. Then came Mrs. Macrae, with string. After her came 2 garden circle women, carrying a tray of seedlings, and the shamefaced efficiency of people who wanted to repair something without making speeches over it. Now Catriona Sutherland was kneeling by the greenhouse, cleaning mud from a stack of old pots. Her mother stood nearby with Robbie, who kept his eyes on his work but looked less burdened than the day before. They are returning what was borrowed, Elspeth said. Hamish looked at the table. All of it? Not all. Some things do not come back because people carry them too long. There was no self-pity in her voice. Only fact. A car door slammed in the lane below. Blair arrived with Detective Anderson, shoes polished, face red, and the air of a man determined to treat resolution as personal property. Macbeth, he called. There you are. I've been speaking to the press. That was brave of them, said Hamish. Blair ignored him. Told them we had the matter well in hand from the start. Elspeth looked at Hamish. Was that before or after he tried to arrest the Marrow man? Anderson coughed into his fist. Blair frowned. This is still an active investigation. So is gardening, said Elspeth. Yet some people manage not to trample the beds. Hamish turned away before Blair saw him smile. Anderson stepped closer to Hamish and lowered his voice. Morven's given enough to make it plain. Says she only meant to frighten Blaine into delaying the report. Aye, said Hamish. Folk often say, only after the worst part is done. She keeps saying she saved the project. Did she? Anderson looked around the garden. The old labels, the returned envelopes, the volunteers moving carefully under Elspeth's eye. "She saved the paperwork," he said at last. Hamish nodded. "There's a difference." At mid-morning, Archie Bell came up the path, carrying a small pot in both hands. He held it out to Elspeth with the awkward solemnity of a man unused to apologies. "Marrow seedling," he said. Elspeth looked at it. "I didna ask for a marrow." "No. But you might want one. At my age, I avoid responsibilities larger than they need to be." "It's a good line," Archie said. "Strong shoulders. Vegetables do not have shoulders. Mine do." There was a pause. Then Elspeth laughed. It was not a large laugh, but it changed the garden more than the sun had. Catriona looked up. Mrs. Patel smiled into her flask cup. Robbie grinned at the soil. Archie, encouraged, said, "It will likely be better than anything shown yesterday." "Do not spoil your apology by being yourself too quickly," said Elspeth. He accepted that as generously as he could. By noon, the Garden Circle's formal letter arrived, written by 3 trembling hands and signed by 6. The Heritage Grant application would not be withdrawn, it would be amended. The project would be renamed the Elspeth Kerr Seed Garden, and the Lochdew Blue Bean, Kerr's Early Pea, and Minister's Gloom Kale would be recorded under their proper source. Elspeth read the letter twice. Then she folded it and put it beside the biscuit tin. "Well," she said, "that is nearly decent." "In Lochdew," said Hamish. "Nearly decent can be a fine beginning." Down by the hall, the remaining prizes were quietly collected. Mrs. McCrae's dahlias won first. Mrs. Wellington's relish was given second in miscellaneous domestic produce, which she accepted as an insult but carried home with visible pride. Archie's marrow received a special commendation for size, a phrase he repeated all afternoon as if it were a title. The police station window box won nothing. Hamish considered this a mercy. When he returned home near evening, he found Luggs asleep beside the stove with one paw over his nose, refusing all comment on village improvement. Sunsey crossed the back wall outside, paused long enough to glance at him through the window, and vanished toward Elspeth's garden, as if going to inspect whether proper credit had been assigned. Hamish stood for a moment with the kettle in his hand. A woman was dead. Another woman's pride had become a crime. An old gardener had been given back her name, though not the years in which others had spoken over it. The village would talk. It always did. But perhaps, for a while, when someone praised a fine bean, they would remember to ask whose hand had saved the seed. And that, Hamish thought, was not justice enough. But it was a start. Lochdew kept its flower and produce show, though the prize table looked different afterward. People still admired good gardens, fine flowers, and vegetables large enough to deserve their own introductions. But for a while, they remembered to ask a quieter question: whose hands had done the planting? The copper plant label was meant to keep a name beside a living thing. In the end, its green smear became the truth marker. Even a small label can object when one person's work is written over by another. There is a kind of theft that looks almost like praise. When we preserve something but erase the person who kept it alive, we are not honouring tradition. We are polishing our own reflection. Still, kettles boiled. Seedlings changed hands. Someone left jam on Elspeth Kerr's step without signing the card. Luggs slept through the village's moral improvement, and Sunsey crossed the garden wall as if all credit belonged to her. When someone saves another person's work but takes the applause for it, is that kindness, ambition, or theft? Thank you for spending this quiet hour in Lochdew with us. If this mystery kept you listening, leave a light in the window for the next visit to the Highlands. And remember, in Lochdew, even a prize marrow may be less revealing than the little copper label beside it.